Welcome to a new episode of our podcast Idea Talks, where IDEA stands for inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. In this episode, we will be exploring the question why diversity matters in higher education. For this, we will be talking with students and academics to gather all points of view. Shall we start? First, we have two of our Unite students, Louie and Bartosz.
So my name is Louie, my pronouns are they, them, and I'm a student at Aalto University, currently doing my master's in the Life Science Technologies program, majoring in Human Neuroscience and Technology, and I did my bachelor's also at Aalto University in Chemical Engineering.
Hello, my name is Bartosz Stec. I'm from Wrocław Tech, from Poland, and currently I'm a PhD candidate, but also a teacher at the Faculty of Management in my university. Thank you very much for enabling me to be here with you, and see you.
Yeah, thank you both and welcome. Here's my first question. When you hear the words inclusion, diversity, what do they mean to you? Do you have any personal experience that you can relate to these words?
So when I hear the words inclusion, diversity, and equity, it really does mean a lot to me. I have a great deal of personal experience that I can relate to these words. And as someone that is both autistic and has ADHD, it is so important that we keep in mind that everyone, regardless of gender, ethnicity, presentation, anything, should be treated in a way that is equitable. So not only providing the same opportunities, but making sure that all the opportunities are accessible for everyone.
That's a very interesting reflection. Thank you, Louis. And Bartosz, how about diversity in the students' organizations? What can you tell us about that?
So students' organizations, student associations bring together a lot of people, a lot of different people. And there is, I think, the hard thing, especially for leaders and people who are genuinely involved in this type of activities, is that many people means many perspectives, and that's a good thing. But on the other side, it's very hard to manage a lot of, I think, clashing ideas. And maybe not ideas, and even like expectation, the goals, because there are a lot of people who have their expectation, who wants to do something for some outcome, and dealing with this can be very hard. But on the other side of these things, if students survive working in the environment like this, when they are not paid for doing like the job or other activities, I think that's a very strong base for being very good, very helpful, and very team aware employee in the future. I think that there is a lot of value in staying, in working, in volunteering, in environments like this, like in student organization.
Thank you, Bartosz. Now going back to you, Louis. Why do you think diversity, equity is so important in higher education? Why does it matter?
So I think that inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility, so the idea, is really important in higher education, not only because everyone has a right to a higher education and should have one that is accessible to themselves, but it's also important that we keep in mind that in higher education, there's a lot of learning for the sake of learning, but in the end, I think most of us hope to achieve something practical out of this. And if we don't have everyone in the room, and by everyone I mean, an inclusive community that actually represents the diversity that we see across the entire world, then we are forgetting about something and someone, because education and science and knowledge, they are not separate things from our own identities and how we interact with the world. So everyone will always insert their own biases and their own perspectives into education and the research that they can do. So by having a higher diversity, not only are we able to balance out some of the views, but also we can ensure that we really reach as wide of a knowledge pool as we can get.
Bartosz, you've been working a lot with SURE, with Unite. What do you think are the benefits of working at such level for inclusion and diversity? How can Unite help to these concepts and promote them?
Oh yeah, there are a lot of benefits. There is a lot of value in doing activities in the environment like this, international environment. But I think maybe thing that is underrated in this context is again the ability to work with people who are different from you, because in different countries people tend to do different things or approach problems from the different perspectives. And if you are willing to accept how people are doing different things, and you are willing to change maybe your way of doing things, accept them, change yours, and develop something together, I think it massively upgrades your social resume. Because if you are able to cooperate in international environment, in international projects successfully, then doing things, for example, in your own language with people who are more similar to you will be much, much easier, and people do not see these benefits from far, far away, because they see something like getting better in English or meeting people or traveling, seeing the world. I think the thing that I mentioned, I think it's a massive value for people, and yeah, that's a huge thing that people should count in.
And how about you, Louie? What's your experience in Unite?
So I think that the Unite University Alliance has both met my expectations and regarding diversity and inclusion, both exceeding them, but it has also fallen below my expectations in some ways. I think that although it is great that it seeks to listen to more diverse voices and include people of all kinds, it is quite difficult when we see that especially disabled folks are and other marginalized communities are already under such stress and strain that forcing to further advocate for oneself feels sometimes like too much work. I think that there should be already at the alliance level some sort of initiative that would be low stakes, low effort barrier to enter, and from which everyone could contribute and not feel pressured to engage in a way that exceeds their abilities at the moment.
That seems a very good piece of advice for the Unite community to continue engage with diversity and making everyone feel welcome. Thank you. Thank you both for joining us in the discussion today. Now, moving to our next guest, we have Didac Ferrer to interview Giulia Sonetti. Hello, Didac.
Hello, we have here this afternoon Giulia Sonetti,
Hello.
professor at UPC and researcher in IS Global. Yes. So we will talk about why diversity matters in higher education. And my first question would be how can you, in teaching, create a more inclusive classroom?
So, if I start from teaching, I would say I would ask to myself one simple question. Who is the classroom designed for? Because we are typically used to have one curriculum, like one size fits all. And the typical student is someone who shared the same educational level, the same cultural background, the same emotionally driven landscape. And probably this is not the case in our classroom nowadays. No, we have to face with culturally, socially, emotionally, and cognitively different people.
Do you think that diversity is increasing in classrooms today?
I think so, and I am happy to see that is increasing. Also in terms of neurodivergence diagnosis or disability or social difference. And this is very much enriching because learning becomes much more relational and collective rather than one-way knowledge transfer from the professor to the students. And this is much more interesting for me as well as a professor because I'm learning from the collective intelligence that can be sprout from such diverse classroom.
Could you put some examples of practices or methods to embrace this diversity in the classroom?
Yeah. First of all, from a decolonizing perspective, me as a teacher, I can diversify the knowledges and the epistemologies that I bring into the classroom. So not only one way of seeing the problem, but including like indigenous knowledge or multiple like scholars that address the problem in different cultural contexts, in different historical narratives on the same topic. So there are students that now feel comfortable speaking about a movie they've seen or a podcast they've listened to or an experience they've made. And those experiences are valuable as much as a paper that I can bring on a particular topics. Indeed, I work on sustainability science and it is inherently complex and is inherently needing multiple perspectives to address complex and wicked problems.
We'll come back later on that research you are doing, but there is something that worries me. Is there any possibility that we get too much diversity in a classroom that makes teaching not appropriate or comfortable for the teacher?
Well, it depends from what we are teaching. So if you are teaching physics, probably you don't need so much diversity in terms of voices to be heard. But if you are teaching how to plan a new neighborhood that could be inclusive for vulnerable groups of people, that needs to be as much diverse as possible. Because of course you have to embrace the uncertainty of being exposed to multiple layers of knowledges. But then you also acquire the capacity to deal with this uncertainty and to differ from knowledges that are like useful or not in certain time of your learning processes. This is indeed what is called transformative learning.
Okay. Thank you, Giulia. So now let's, as an academic, you also do research and you are also confronted to the possibility of including diversity in your research. So, well, there's a lot of studies that say that diversity in research leads to better results and so on. But can you put a concrete example where this is happening? You have seen it and you can just roughly show us?
Yeah, I can bring forward my own research topic. I hold a Marie Curie fellowship now that is called Cycling to Care, that is about leveraging the emotional well-being of the students as a catalyst for pro-environmental behavioral change to foster active hope toward the future. This is very tricky as a research because I want to include the NGO working on emotional well-being. I want to include psychologists or psychiatrists working on scales and psychometric value to understand how to do rigorous research on that. I want to include students themselves as object and subject of the research process. I want to include intergenerational dialogues as new perspective on the existential threat we are exposed to nowadays as a society. Still, all the weight of being so transformative in this kind of research and so inclusive and so rich in diversity of voices to be heard and data to be collected is a burden that I face alone. And this is something that is not so fair because you as an institution shall promote this diversity, but also protect who is like leading this effort to change the way we are teaching and research, including more people, including more voices, embracing uncertainty and diversity. Because then the self-care practices are neglected so far, and is not something that is often recognized by the institution, this extra effort.
Okay. However, not all the research is approaching so complex subjects as your example. And how does working in diverse teams modify the way you think of the research question?
This is interesting because I'm a sort of expert in transdisciplinary process. That is something that happens also when you do interdisciplinary process, because when you engage as a disciplinary specialist in a project that needs the collaboration with other disciplines, you are transformed like in terms of inner capacity. We can say, we can cite the inner development goals as 5 fields in which you could be transformed by having more diversity in your research team, holding your specialist knowledge, but being forced to be humble, to be listening to other perspective, and not to disregard because of biases, because of fears, other ways of interpreting the same phenomenon. So I'm very happy when I have to face and like challenges towards my own epistemology, my own points of view, because indeed, this diversity makes me feel like I'm not the only one holding the truth. And especially with STEM, like science, technology, engineering, mathematics discipline, this is much needed now, because we cannot measure everything that matters. And especially for problems that require collaboration, being humble in these terms is the first step to engage in more meaningful research.
Thanks. Well, as a last question, it would be anything you would like to see changing at at universities to promote diversity in research? Do you think something new is needed today?
Yes, probably there are already like communities of practices that are cultivating these inner skills to understand how to do that. So peer-to-peer support. The thing is, we are doing that in our extra time. So probably what is needed is a recognition of this extra time as a time that we spend to train ourselves in order to be better teacher, better researcher, but also better like human beings in our organization. So I guess the institutional recognition of such effort is the first step, and it's very easy. It's a political decision then.
So you mean that diversity in research adds value but needs resources?
Indeed.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Didac.
Okay.
Thank you, Didac. Thank you, Giulia, for this inspiring conversation. To try to deepen into the reflection, we will now move on to our next guest. In TU Darmstadt, we have our colleague Benedetta Gennaro to interview Anshika Suri from the Secretariat of Unite, who will help us understand how can university alliances contribute to making a more inclusive higher education. Hi, Benedetta. Hi, Anshika. Welcome.
Anshika, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah. Thank you, Benedetta. So I am Dr. Anshika Suri. I am the Deputy Secretary General and the Policy and Education Coordinator for Unite. And I have been in Europe, even though I'm Indian by nationality, I've been in Europe for the last 14 years. So this is very much a chosen home, but I bring my own set of diversity.
That's great, because that fits that into our first question of the day. So what do inclusion and diversity mean to you in the context of higher education?
So to me, diversity, at least to start with in higher education, means bringing people together, different backgrounds, experiences, cultures, disciplines, perspectives, just a way of thinking. But inclusion is a step further. It is ensuring that all the above happens, but you feel valued and that you feel respected, and that it's not just about access to participate, but being able to participate fully. So this one step ahead that is there is, I think, the point which is important, because a university can be a very diverse place where you can see diversity reflected in your everyday life, but for it to be inclusive, the people who make up the university, like the staff, the students, they need to not feel invisible or disconnected. They actually need to feel like that they're in an environment where they're not being pressured to fit into some mold. So for me, that is essentially an equitable access and participation to opportunities in whatever role you are in. If you can be a student, you can be a researcher, you can also be in a leadership role, you can be an academic. So it's about giving due recognition to the difficulties and barriers that people may face. And I speak from personal experience as well. I have been a student in Europe. I've studied in Germany, I've studied in Spain, I've studied in France, and I've studied in the UK. Apart from that, I've also worked in Tanzania and Kenya as well as part of my work and research. So to me, all these places also make up the person that I am. And I've also faced barriers, but I've also had opportunities. So for me, these collective experiences form the diversity, but I have had the opportunity to also have inclusion as part of my life, but also be very aware of the challenges of when you are not included in spaces you would like to be.
That's a very interesting topic that you bring up. The sense diversity is one step, inclusion is the broadening of that, or the implementing live diversity in a sense. But I think what is very important also is what you said in terms of choices. So a university can be diverse and inclusive as much as it can offer the choice of doing, participating in actively in its community life, participating in mobility, for instance, having the choice, not maybe deciding to go on mobility, for instance, is already in itself an inclusive action.
Yes.
So I think that's a very important point of view that we seldom talk about. The power of giving choices, which then behind it means we have structures, we have support, and
I mean, I would like to add to this. So this is something that I had actually done also during my PhD, because it was, while on a technical infrastructure sanitation, it was from an intersectional perspective. And that was the biggest question that I asked was, what happens when you actually give someone the choice? And often, at least in that case, what we would see is people were expected to be grateful for the choice simply because of the need or the inadequacy that was there. And it should not have come with the burden of gratefulness attached to it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're working with that sense of inclusion, and if you want to work with the sense of choice, the person in a power position to provide that access, if they adopt the stance of whoever is gaining that should feel grateful to have it, I think that's also one of the barriers that needs to be recognized. And that was something that I worked with, that sometimes it's not about the need of an inadequacy, it's just about the fear of what that comes burden to it. So
absolutely. And I think that's also, maybe we can do a little bit of self-promotion, going back to some of the podcasts that we already produced. The one about the EDAM, the project that we coordinated as a sort of a side project from Unite, is precisely this, also shifting the responsibility by also shifting and renewing, if you will, the language towards the groups that we want to include. So we don't speak about underrepresented anymore. We speak about underserved, because it's the system that is failing some of us.
Yeah.
And that people that are failed from the system shouldn't be grateful if they're given the opportunity.
It's, for me, like, it is part of a basic right.
Yes.
If you're, and especially in university as an academic life that we talk about, everyone is should be an equal participant, should be the assumption that you should work with.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when we're looking at also, as you said, international students, you're already coming half the way across the world to another context, another culture. There's already strength and courage in what they have done. Mm-hmm. And reducing their choice to grateful acceptance is in a way also you are minimizing the experience that that student has. And
Yes.
in a way, then you are kind of propagating very words like colonial perspectives, which is not very
It's also
helpful.
in the tip of my tongue, or patronizing or patriarchal structures. But we are not in a, although we could start a feminist podcast, but
But we're not there yet.
but that's not the goal of this particular one. Maybe to hark back to our sort of the context of this podcast. What can university alliances then do, or what can Unite do within its own partnership of 9 very different universities to maybe foster this inclusiveness?
I think especially from an alliances perspective, what has been one of the biggest strengths that we have is that we are being asked to bring along institutional transformation. Change takes time, but Unite is one of the first generation alliances. So we have actively been building ourselves, where we now do have the voice of the people who are responsible for decision making in the universities to be heard. And this institutional transformation is where we actually have a space to provide social value, to improve the quality and relevance of when we talk about these topics in education. So it cannot be achieved through policies alone, it cannot be achieved simply by sharing common goals or understandings, but when we are deep within institutional transformation where small bottom-up initiatives can also have an impact, and that impact can be scaled up and amplified, I think this is where our alliances like ours actually have the chance to firstly not treat this as symbolic exercise. You can actually learn, the institutions can learn from each other. One institution might be doing quite well and be able to share what they're doing. For example, we have one partner where we instituted the concept of student liaison officers in this current project phase, because while we had an amazing student body called SHORE from the beginning who had done amazing work, there was a need assessment that realized that to amplify their voices and to give them skill, there needs to be a person who actually liaisons with them back and forth to also explain to them institutional policies, but for the institutions to also have their voice. Now, beyond this point, in our next project phase, what we realized was one is active participation, as we had always ascribed to SHORE and to our SLOs. But active participation cannot be restricted in the means and measures that we have been working with, where we just reach out to them wherever we need feedback. If we want them to be active contributors, that's what our next project phase has concretely envisioned, where in work packages, SLOs and the student bodies are written as co-content providers. They have to actually be part of the implementation process and not only in giving us feedback and assessment. So change takes time, where we are evaluating, and I think this is where alliances like ours, where one student liaison is a student, the other student liaison is a past student who's actually now working in the university, another student liaison happens to be a vice president of student mobility. So just the diversity of those, or our student representatives from universities who are also new partners, who have joined us in our second phase. So I think this institutional learning of what is going well in another partner can bring about a transformative change. And I know that sometimes those things seem small and random and isolated, but their collective impact, when looked upon, is far greater than the sum. That needs to be just viewed upon in a very different lens. But partly, I think what the alliances can also do is to create an alternative model. I don't think that our alliance especially will overtake the institutional way of working. We are 9 very established universities with long history of their own and long history of collaboration through other networks. But what our alliance is uniquely positioned in is that because we have such established structures, this way of working at our alliances is an alternative model which is very much needed. We are moving towards a very different age where there will be AI, education has to change, the geopolitics has changed where funding into education is being reduced as well. So we will have to find alternative models which support us. And I think a lot of students want to have, going back to that previous discussion, choice. The choice to either go towards the model that has time and tested existed, it has stood the test of time, but there is an alternative that is provided to them, and this alternative essentially boosts the access to choice and not to push that choice on them. So to me, that is the biggest transformative power. And if we go on just scales level, just let's say from an education teaching perspective, what the Alliance can bring is not just the diversity of access to different kinds of shared courses and joint courses, but the diversity to also reflect on the knowledge that you're actually gaining access to. We've had courses like virtual credit exchange program where it's actually treated as a buffet. You can take part in either the main course, you can take part in just the entree, or just treat it as one system that fits for you. But the student has the choice to design and access whichever part of the course they want to have, depending on what is their need at that point. So these small innovative teaching formats present the students also an access to share different perspectives with someone that maybe they will probably not be sitting in the same class as. So not to push how the classes transformed during the pandemic, but to actually take on the good parts of, for some people, instead of just being within their bubble, to just have that bubble expanded.
Right, and boosting participation or boosting the possibility of participating differently enriches everybody, enriches not just students, but also academic staff, administrative staff, leadership because there is more energy that is shared in a way. So I think that was a perfect segue into hoping that we get the third phase of financing so that we can actually really structurally implement and what we have worked, all of us have worked for the past 8 years now. So thank you, Anshika Suri, and I hope that you will be our guest in the next phase of podcast when we get the new financing.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
So that was it. That's how we end our 8th Idea Talks episode. And we hope, dear guest, that now you are more able to answer the question, why diversity matters in higher education? Thank you, and until next time.